What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. A pretty decent week on the waiver wire this week, not only because of the potential for Trey Benson on waiver wire, but because we do have a few rookies that we should be paying attention to just a little bit more in the upcoming weeks. We'll start off at the top, though. Of course, really unfortunate the injury to James Conner. I haven't seen any sort of exact update as far as what exactly the injury is, but it's a severe ankle injury. It is going to end his season. That now makes Trey Benson the running back one on the Cardinals. And while he's not going to get 100% of the work, this is not last season McCaffrey goes down, you see Jordan Mason step up, he's getting literally 100% of the volume. That's not going to be Benson, but the expectation is he'll get enough to where in a 12, 14, 16 team league, you're spending 100% of your fab. So that's going to be the biggest decision point this week is how far do you go? Because I think everyone can agree when a running back one goes down and there's a relatively clear handcuff behind him, it's going to get, I would say 75%, maybe more of the work in some weeks. Everyone's going to go after them. What do? I really do think in a 12 team league or greater, you just spend 100%. It's pretty rare during the season you get someone who I do not think will be a running back one, but every single week will be viable at running back two. That's just too much value to get for quote unquote free. To be able to drop your worst player and to get a running back two rest of season, that's valuable enough to where I would just spend all of your fab. Even if you lose all of that rest of season, you got what you should be spending the fab on. I don't know. I think it's kind of worth it. Again, he's not going to be a running back one. James Conner wasn't even running back one. He's not as good as James Conner. I do think he's also somewhat of a worse prospect than we thought, because last season he was a relatively high-end prospect. Probably a worse prospect than we thought, but can be used in the receiving game, is highly explosive. I think the big issue with Benson sometimes will be he's kind of more of that home run hitter, so he gets to the outside, uses that speed, hits for big plays. Not as much of a between the tackles guy. That's what James Conner was much better at than him. So again, he's not going to be James Conner. He's not going to be amazing. But when you have a running back on a decent offense getting what I think is going to be about 75% of the workload, we're going to start that every week. I think you just spend all of it. I would say an 8 or a 10 team league, you can go down a little bit, but as a general rule of thumb, I do think worth the number one claim, worth all your fab, just put it all out there. It's really not the end of the world. If you get Trey Benson, you have no fab left, you can figure it out. I promise you can figure it out for agency rest of the season. Other two players I just wanted to mention because they're not in the same tier as Benson, but they should be rostered easily in 100% of leagues in even if you're in a 16 league, all these guys should be rostered. But Trey Benson's at the top. Then I would say it's Chris Godwin and Darnell Mooney. Maybe your league is just slow to adapt. I don't know, but Chris Godwin could return next week or the week after. Darnell Mooney is very, very clearly a good running back. He's going to be having his workload ramp up. And if there was an injury there, he would actually be a top 10 running back all season. So definitely make sure. I would say for those two, it's 25%. So if either Godwin or Darnell Mooney are available in your league, I'd be willing to spend up to 25% to get either one of them. But again, the likelihood is honestly for a lot of you, all three of them are already rostered. So we'll go on to everyone else after that. And I still think, even if you said none of those three were available, I still think it's a relatively strong week, stronger at, I would say, wide receiver and maybe tight end. But it's a decent week. If you wanted a kind of a back end, kind of last wide receiver on your roster, there's some good options this week. But after those top options, I would say Fields is probably the next best. It's definitely possible, and I've seen a lot of leagues where people drop Justin Fields. I would expect him back. Usually it's 1 week with a concussion, so I think he'll be back this coming week. They play at the Dolphins. You've got Justin Fields, who in most, I would say 85% of matchups will project as a top 13 quarterback at the Dolphins. Will be one of those spots where he will project he might project to the top 7 quarterback if he plays this week. So obviously if someone dropped him, go after him unless you have one of the top 4 quarterbacks. Definitely go after Justin Fields, even if it's just as a rotational piece for the rest of the season. When he plays, he's going to be great in fantasy, and especially when it's a great matchup like this. Dolphins defense, a complete joke this season. After him, probably a surprise to a lot of you, but I would say the next best option is Woody Marks. Maybe not a surprise if you know my stance on Nick Chubb. I'm not a Chubb fan right now. Obviously, I think everyone's been a Nick Chubb fan throughout his career. He's been fantastic. This season for fantasy football, I'm not a big believer in Nick Chubb. Outside of that one play he has to close, and it wasn't even like a monster play. It was a 25-yard touchdown when they sold out to stop the run. Then he happened to get through a lane. Outside of that one play, he has 17.2 half PPR fantasy points across 3 weeks. That is low-end running back for production. You cannot trust Nick Chubb. And from like a football standpoint, I understand people who are like, the vision is still there. He can still get that like 3 to 4 yards when it's blocked for him. It's like, yeah, but the offensive line stinks. So a lot of times those 3 or 4 yards are not blocked. And who cares if you're busting off 3 to hopefully 4 yards every play? There's no upside there. He's not good in the receiving game. Like, I get it if they want to give him like 6 or 7 early down grinder carries each week. I just don't see how it's viable long term to keep using Nick Chubb this season for the Texans. So I don't think that'll continue. Woody Marks has been limited all season, right? Like, we're not working on a very large sample size here. So we still don't really know how good Woody Marks is. But when he gets touches, you can clearly see the athleticism. We know in college he was great in the receiving game. So even though he has like 2 targets this season, he's caught both of them. He's been efficient on both of them. We know, even given just that production, he was so good in the receiving game in college. He's looked good on those receptions. We know with 100% certainty he's going to be their best pass catching back this season. So I think that role at this point is relatively on lock. I think rest of season, you can kind of assume he's in that role. But overall, the snaps are increasing, right? 11% in week 1, 26% in week 2, 47% this week. If he can get up to like a 60% snap share to win all the passing down snaps at running back, he should not be available in any leagues. And I think that takes one more week. I think next week he goes out there, gets a couple more carries, a couple targets, and people are like, wait a minute, why is he on free agency everywhere? Add him this week before we see that end up happening. I don't know the long-term upside because like the Texans line is still bad. I'm still not like a Woody Marks believer, and that like I think he's a feature back at any point in his career. I don't think he's like that great on early down. So we can still see a scenario where like he takes kind of change of pace early down, he takes receiving down, but the Nick Chubb is still there taking those like 6 to 7 early down grinder carries, mix that in with a handful for Woody Marks and some receptions, and you're like, okay, I'm still not really starting that. But if Chubb starts to break down, if Chubb ever got injured, if they, I don't know, are out of contention at some point later in the season, we could still see, or Woody Marks is just better than I think. He could kind of take over. Maybe he's getting 70% of the volume, including red zone, including passing down, to where maybe we do start him as a back half starter. So I think the upside is there. I think he would be like the next most appealing player to me. After him, I would say it's a big cluster of these like young wide receivers who most of them maybe we're not playing right now, but who absolutely in a month, 2 months have the upside to be players we're starting every single week. And who knows, maybe in 1 month we're starting some of these guys every week. But I would say the order for me right now is Elic Ayomanor, who we've talked about literally every week so far, Luther Burden, Darnell Mooney, Tre Tucker, and Tory Horton. I would say like that kind of group of 5 is the next most appealing, and I would put that again in that order. It'll change depending on what you want though. So like I think all 5 kind of offer slightly different reasons as to why you'd want to go after them. To me, Elic is the best because he's the best mold of all of that, right? He's productive right now. He's used in the red zone. I think he's the wide receiver 36. So he's literally like a back half wide receiver 3 through 3 weeks. And that is as a rookie with a rookie quarterback, like red zone role, commanding targets, looking good. Like, and you think rookie quarterback will get better in the second half of the year. Rookie wide receiver will also get better. Like if he's already kind of commanding looks over Calvin Ridley, you don't think that could potentially grow in the second half of the year where maybe he's a consistent flex option for you? Because like right now he's producing in that role. And again, we're expecting to get better and he's played difficult defenses. So I think, again, I don't know that Elic is ever going to be like a top 10 wide receiver, but he's clearly athletic, clearly talented, clearly used in the red zone. Like, I don't know. I'm pretty excited about this kid. We talked about how he'd be featured in the week 1 video. Then we talked about week 2, talked about him here. He should be rostered. He's a top 36 wide receiver so far this season. Looks good, looks athletic. He needs to be rostered in all formats, and that counts like 18 leagues as well. After Elic, I think it's Luther Burden, but it's different, right? So with Elic, theoretically, if you're in a 12-team league, I don't know if I'd love it right now at the flex spot because a lot of you drafted like pretty wide receiver heavy this season. So you probably have a decent wide receiver room. But in a second flex spot, and especially a 14-team league, just a regular starter, but in like 3 wide receiver leagues as well, you could actually play him. Luther Burden, you can't. So like, even though he had that really good game this last week, 3 targets, 3 receptions, I think it was 101 receiving yards and a touchdown, plus the 7-yard carry. That's great production. It was on 29% of the snaps. So the snap share didn't actually increase. It was just earlier in the week, Ben Johnson actually talked about wanting to get Luther Burden more involved. That's just going to continue as the season goes along. So you're going to see Zacchaeus snaps kind of go away. Who knows? Maybe DJ Moore gets traded. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. The role is going to increase. He's going to go to a 50%, a 60% snap share. It's going to start increasing there. And when that happens and he continues getting the schemed usage, because the targets so far are more schemed. They're not as much like, hey, Luther, go out there and command looks on your own. He's not to that level yet. But if he gets to that level and he's also getting schemed and this offense starts to, kind of click a little bit more because they looked a little bit better this week. Obviously, Caleb still has these accuracy issues. But if this offense gets going, especially in the passing game, and he's getting this usage and he's commanding looks, he will be someone that we're starting every week in fantasy. So immense upside, but he's more of a long-term play than like Elic is like right now. If you need production, go for him. Luther is, ceiling-wise better than Elic. I mean, he's on a better offense, better coordinator, better quarterback at this point. You could kind of argue that, but probably better quarterback play right now, and then better prospect as well. Like Luther was a relatively high-end prospect. So I think longer-term play for him. Behind Burden, it's more of that shorter-term play again with Darnell Mooney. Been weird with Mooney, been weird with the whole Falcons offense these last 2 weeks and the 2 weeks that he's been healthy. We see 2 weeks ago, or I guess a week ago, in week 2, really strong target share, but they won easily, right? They threw it 21 times. They didn't have to throw the ball. They didn't have to be aggressive. And so the snaps were there, the target share was there, but didn't have to do anything. This last week, 27% target share, 11 targets. They lost 30-0 to the Panthers. Like, I don't know how you can go from blowing out the Vikings to being embarrassed, more than a blow, just absolutely embarrassed by the Panthers. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. But I don't think that's going to be like what we're looking at all season. It's like, oh, they blow a team out, then they get blown out. Like, I think they're going to be a lot more games where the Falcons are competitive. And if he's playing 90% of the snaps, getting 11 targets in some of these games, he's probably going to have, between a 20 and a 25%. I would say, if I had to guess, a 21% target share for Mooney. A 21% target share on a team playing in a dome with a decent offense, consolidated offense, when they're not getting blown out or blowing other teams out, that's going to be a decent play in the flex spot, honestly, in a lot of weeks. So another player should not be available anywhere. It's only because they've had 2 weird game scripts. But if he had hit on these 11 targets, everyone would go after him. And if they hadn't just like not thrown the ball last week, he'd already be rostered everywhere. But because 2 weeks in a row it's been weird, he's available in these amount of leagues. After Mooney, I think it's Tre Tucker. It's just, it feels so much like points chasey, like 8 receptions, 145 yards, 3 touchdowns. That is not going to happen every week. I would say short term, while we still have Bowers a little bit banged up, especially with them playing the Bears this week, maybe you could flex him. Like, he played really well. He had a good game in week 1. He's out there over 90% of the snaps. Bears have a terrible defense. Like, if you wanted to play him in the flex spot, I don't think he's going to project that badly this week. But I do think long-term, this is like more to do with Bowers. If Bowers, was 100% healthy and they're scheming more usage to him, that's coming at the expense of Tucker. I think he's kind of only hitting right now because of Bowers being a little bit banged up, Genty not fully getting going yet. I think long-term, I don't love Tucker. But like, if you're like, Nick, I need someone for next week, well, obviously go after Tre Tucker and not Luther Burden. But if you're like, Nick, I don't need anyone this next week. My wide receiver room is set. I want someone who in the second half of the season could be awesome. It's not Tre Tucker, it's Luther Burden. So again, order it differently depending on what you need from this group. Final player from the group, though, and I think kind of like both ends is probably the final player, is Tory Horton. We have to acknowledge that this game was a blowout in the first quarter. Like, the Seahawks had this game won in the first quarter. That's why Tory Horton had a lot more snaps, got some opportunities that maybe wouldn't have presented themselves, like We know most of this target share is going to Jackson Smith-Njigba. We know that Kupp will be involved. But when you're winning, like, what was it, 28-3 after one quarter, the game's over. And so, of course, Horton's going to get more snaps. But he looks great. He has the punt return. I think the punt return touchdown, not kickoff, but now I'm questioning it. So I think it was a punt return touchdown, but could have been kickoff return. Looks great on that. Looks great out there and the routes that he's running, and looked great in the preseason. This wasn't like a random thing. He was getting hype in camp. He got hype in the preseason. He's looked good whenever he's been on the field. So he is a great prospect. I'd be very excited if you got him in Dynasty. And you know what? Cooper Kupp does not stay healthy typically. So there's no guarantee that in 3 weeks, Cooper Kupp is not injured and Tory Horton's not playing 90% of the snaps. And if that occurs across from JSN in not an elite offense, but a pretty good offense, like you could have a full-time wide receiver who's very talented, ascending as a rookie, and he might be someone that is actually the most valuable on this list. So I don't want to completely write him off, but I do think I'd probably have him 5th on this list, and I don't think you have to be spending a bunch of fab to get him. Some lower end wide receiver ads you could look at if maybe you're in a deeper format. Maybe you have a really deep bench, so you've got like 7, 8 bench spots, and you're like, Nick, I got options here to take some shots. Jalen Coker, we know that Leggett is terrible at this point. I mean, just horrific, and he's injured. We know that this next week, Coker's not going to play. He's on IR, so he will miss week 4 as well. But he can return in week 5. Again, I don't know if that's going to happen, but he's eligible to return in week 5. And once he does return, I think it's going to be Tet as their clear alpha on the X. I think that Hunter Renfrow is probably going to stay in the slot, but they're going to have him as a Z wide receiver, Coker, and he's going to play well. He was really good to end last season. Again, wasn't a high-end prospect last year, but was really good to end the year. Had a phenomenal camp. He was the reason they didn't feel like they needed to keep Adam Thielen, and he was going to be their number 2 wide receiver to start the year, but then he suffers the injury. And to be fair, that's something he struggled with throughout his career, so we got to kind of track that sort of thing. But again, closes the season good, great camp, opens up, should have been the number 2. Now no one's even considering him because he starts on IR. But once he comes off IR, once he's eligible to play, he's going to be like a full-time wide receiver. And I mean, this offense isn't usually going to win 30-0. They're going to have some good games, but they're going to be trailing a lot. And I think he's pretty talented. So I don't think anyone really remembers him. If you have a free IR spot, my goodness, why haven't you done that already? Like pick him up, put him on IR, and then just grab the player you probably dropped before. But yeah, he's a great option for a stash. Isaac Tesla plays tonight, so we'll see. They talked about maybe getting him a little bit more involved. Of course, this offense is so good that it's like, you don't really want to be like, you're not taking Amon St. Brown off the field. You're not taking J-Mo off the field, right? Like you're still getting looks to Gibbs, Laporta, J-Mo, Amon. So it's like they can only increase it so much, but the snaps skyrocketed from week 1 to week 2. His 2 targets this season have been great plays. It's so obvious that he's great in the run game, great in schemed usage, that I do think they're going to slowly scheme him more and more opportunities. And he's one away. Like most wide receivers, if there's an injury, like they don't necessarily step up to be amazing. Could you imagine if like J-Mo got hurt, if Amon-Ra got hurt, and they really needed him to be that like number 2 wide receiver on this team? I think he'd be phenomenal. So I'm very excited to have him in Dynasty. I understand that like, it's more of a low end play. I'd still take all these other wide receivers over him, but as that bench stash, the upside is there. And who knows, like maybe they just really start to scheme him consistent usage in the red zone. And we're like, man, we got to start this guy every week at some point. I don't think that happens in the next month and a half, but this is a second half of the season play. After him, I think it's like Tyquan Thornton. He's played well. He has fantasy production right now. And, he's been used in that deep role because Hollywood's just very overrated in that role. But Worthy should be back next week. Rashee Rice returns in week 7. So this is more like if you're in a 14 or 16 team league and you like really needed something next week, sure. I just don't think that's really that viable. And then for those of you in really deep formats, right? 16 teams, deep bench, and you're like, I need someone with a pulse at wide receiver. Arian Smith, the rookie on the Jets, full snap share this last week, got some hype in camp. I doubt he's anything in fantasy though, because I don't know that he's all that talented. I don't know if this Jets offense will ever throw the ball that much, but maybe Garrett Wilson won't have like a 40% target share all season. Maybe that'll come down at some point to 30%. Maybe they do actually start to use that number 2 wide receiver, and maybe that ends up being Arian Smith. Again, only in very, very deep formats. At running back, it's not that great behind those like clear top options in my eyes. Everyone else is just a handcuff, right? So if you have a free bench spot, usually I do lean running back, right? If you had done this with Trey Benson last week, you just got so much of a return. Whereas like if you're just adding some like low end wide receiver, I mean, how much of a return are you really expecting? So if you only have one bench spot and you're like, I just want someone with some upside to break out, it's usually a handcuff running back. I would say among the handcuffs that are actually available, I think the number one handcuff is probably Brian Robinson Jr., but like he's not available in leagues. I would say it's like Algier, Braylon Allen, probably the most valuable. You could throw Corum into the mix, maybe Manungai. We saw an injury to Samaje Perine this week, and so Taj Brooks is now in the mix as well because Chase Brown has been playing really, really bad. Maybe they give some opportunities to Taj Brooks, but then if Chase Brown got hurt, I mean, you'd have Taj Brooks is like the only viable running back on the roster. Maybe they'd trade for someone at that point, but he would be an option. But yeah, typically it's just, you don't know, right? Like you don't know who's going to get injured. There's no running backs right now that we're like, oh, Woody Marks, Bayshal Tuten, Trey Benson, those are the guys who are going to increase in value without injuries, or now without an injury with James Conner already getting injured. But for everyone else, it's just, we don't know who's going to get hurt, but we are going to see, unfortunately, other injuries at the running back position this season. And so it's worth just saying, I'm going to take one bench spot to see if there's an injury. And if I hit, I can gain a ton of value in that spot. At tight end, it's mostly the guys we talked about. We talked about in week 1, they were on the must draft list, like Hunter Henry, Brenton Strange. Like they're still very, very viable options if for some reason they're available to you on free agency. You can throw Chigakonkwo into that mix as well, but he's not like a super high upside piece. I would say 2 new names this week are Isaiah Likely and Aronde Gadsden II. Likely is not going to play tonight. I think that's confirmed, but he's not going to play tonight. But he might be back next week. And given how uninvolved, at least through 2 weeks so far, Mark Andrews has been, you have to think there's at least a chance that like if Andrews does nothing again this coming week and Likely returns in week 4, who knows? Maybe he steps in, he immediately commands a target share, and he is someone that we're starting as like a low end, maybe like that like tight end, 10 to 14 kind of range every week. That's a possibility, and it's not a possibility for a lot of other tight ends on free agency. There's still a chance he goes out there and commands like 3 targets a game and you cut him, but I think it's worth rostering because we're going to find out soon. Like I do think he's probably back in week 4 or 5, and if that happens, just hold him, see what happens when he returns. If it's nothing, cut him. If it's something, nice. You got some value there. And then with Gadsden, it's a long-term play. So weeks 1 and 2, he's a healthy and active. They have some injuries at tight end, so he's active in week 3. Only plays 25% of the snaps this last week, but turned 7 targets into 5 receptions for 46 yards. It was the best day that a Chargers tight end has had so far. They drafted him as a receiving threat at tight end. They talked about in camp that he was really being used downfield. He was playing great in the receiving game. And so I still think they're probably going to rotate tight ends, but if they can get to a 2 tight end rotation where he's the receiving tight end, we could have a lot of weeks where he's racking up 4 or 5 receptions. And you all know the state of tight end, it's not that great. And so if you're in a deeper format, definitely a name that I'd go after. 8, 10 team leagues, I don't know that you really need to consider him. If it happens again next week where it's like, 45% snap share, 8 targets this week. Okay, now he's really on our radar, even in smaller formats. I would say for most of you though, 8, 10 team leagues, don't need to consider him. But yeah, 12-team leagues, I think he's at least a name kind of worth keeping an eye on. At quarterback, there's really not that much behind Justin Fields. Like he's very clearly the top option if he's there. Other than that, it depends on your league size, all that thing. Like if you're streaming quarterback, you are sometimes looking at options that are like 70% rostered and kind of deciding between them. And so I'm not going to talk about quarterbacks that are 70% rostered. I would say it's Geno. Like if you're in a competitive league, you have to stream quarterback. Maybe you had Jaden Daniels hurt and you for some reason didn't go after Mariota. Geno is going to be good at home versus the Bears. We talked about that when we went over Tre Tucker, and that like maybe long term, I don't love Tre Tucker, but against the Bears, I might. You also have Carson Wentz again this week against the Steelers. Didn't go off last week because they scored like 50 points, but it came on defensive touchdowns on the ground. So I think he still had like 15 fantasy points, but they just didn't need him to throw the ball. Steelers have been really bad. I know they only allowed 14 points to the Patriots last week, but that was because of a fumble at the 1 yard line, a tip pass at the 5 yard line. Like the Patriots probably should have had 31 to 34 points in that game, which sounds crazy to say, but just like unlikely events occurred to take 2 touchdowns off the board. They fumbled the ball 4 times plus the pick. Like the defense was not performing well. It was just kind of like randomness that fell out of favor there. The Steelers are still a defense we want to be attacking this season, so Wentz will be an option. But realistically, you probably, again, are kind of choosing between quarterbacks that are like 60, 70% rostered. So just look at the rankings, see who the top quarterback is, and play them. But yeah, again, Bears, Steelers, they're bad defenses. Like we're going to be targeting them this week. Then finally, streaming defense. Another pretty good week for streaming defenses, honestly. Obviously, last week, we're not going to have as many defensive touchdowns as we had this last week, but you have the Lions at home against the Browns. I know technically the Packers didn't go off against the Browns, but game script was not as expected to go. We can be pretty sure that the Lions at home against the Browns are going to put up a ton of points. That's going to cause 40 to 45 dropbacks for Joe Flacco and the Browns. That leads to a lot of sack potential, a lot of fumble potential. So they're a great option, probably the number one option for you. Texans at home against the Titans. The Titans offensive line can't block anyone, so there's plenty of sack potential there. Cam Ward, I think, is a good prospect, but is definitely live to make some mistakes, throw a pick 6 in this game. Patriots, not that good of a defense, but might have Christian Gonzalez back, and they're home against the Panthers, who may have scored 30 points this last week, but are not an offense that we expect to do that over time. So they're an option, but definitely behind the Lions and the Texans. And then the 49ers at home against the Jaguars. Decent offense for the Jaguars, but terrible offensive line. And Trevor Lawrence is also live to make some mistakes and throw a pick 6 or 2. So again, I would default in the quarterback and defense especially to the rankings. That's kind of how I see things right now, but trust the rankings. Look at the rest of the season rankings tomorrow afternoon. Look at the week 4 rankings tomorrow afternoon. That's going to help you a little bit more in making these waiver moves. Again, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back Wednesday to go over my favorite trade targets this week. Thursday to go over the week 4 rankings. And then Friday to go over my favorite underdog plays this week. So be sure you subscribe both on YouTube and on Spotify to make sure you don't miss any of those. That, my friends, is the end of this one. And thank you all for watching.